Just call me Richard, please. I'll call you Cometa and you call me Richard, okay?
Okay, agreed. For this purpose only.
Okay.
This setting, okay?
Okay, Finley, go ahead.
All right. Is Todd there?
I'm here.
Todd is
Okay.
here.
First of all, welcome to our 23 Zoomerama, our attempt to supplement, not compete, with the main GA 2023. It's going to be a very crucial GA because this will be the first vote to get an idea of just how the Afrocentric neo-racist cabal has gerrymandered the upcoming vote. I'm being cynical, if you don't mind. I heard a wonderful sermon recently, Todd. First of all, Todd, if you were to see me today, you would not recognize me from our 2-year adventure back in 2022. I've lost weight, gained weight.
Wasn't too long ago, and I'm glad to see you're still with us and still fighting the good fight, brother, my big brother.
All right, little bro,
He's
little brother.
big,
He's my little brother. I found that I'm older than he is. But both of us are from the South, so we have that special connection. But looking back on what's happening today, back to 2022, and when we had our I did 2 sermons out at Spokane Church. Wonderful adventure out there, wonderful time, lovely place. Hope I can get back there before termination date. It's amazing how we have how far we've come from simply being a sort of outliers and the voice of them that crieth in the wilderness type people. And so, give us a review, Brother Todd, of what has happened since 2022. That's when we put together this coalition. We didn't know it was going to be a coalition. We thought it'd be temporary.
Yeah.
So what's your review?
I'm going to go back a little farther, even to 2019, right after the General Assembly, in which I gave away my book, which apparently was loaded with gunpowder or something because it caused all sorts of havoc. But it wasn't but a week after that, I think, that I got a call from Finley with an organization called UUMUAC. And I think you left a message on my phone and you said, well, you just did in a weekend what we've been trying to do for years. So I want to hold up UUMUAC as really being the group of people that recognized this going on early on and thought enough to organize, right? To really take this on through some sort of in a systemic collective way. So and of course I've been connected with UUMUAC ever since. So thank you for all the work you've been doing, all the I don't know what the term might be. I would just say the unfairness that you have received as individuals from the UUA leadership that none of us knew about or knew what was going on at the time, because you really experienced a lot of the stuff I experienced, but nobody knew about it. Mine just became very, very public. So I'm really happy to be part of UUMUAC, and I think going back more recently, it really became obvious to me. I mean, I thought there might need to be some sort of split or splinter group early on if we didn't start to turn things around. But the strategy was to turn things around, and that's been my strategy up until recently. I think they will eventually turn around, but it's not going to be because we turn them around. The ship will turn itself around when it finally reaches the dead end or the waterfall it's about to go off or whatever it is. But there's nothing we can do as individuals or collectively to shift the mindset at the UUA right now. And that means probably another decade before it does possibly start to turn around, and our small religion is not going to survive until then. So we have to take steps right now to do what we must do. And this became apparent to me last year when I let my congregation know in an unlisted YouTube video that I was going to begin a petitioning process so that I might get on the ballot as the UUA president this year. That's something that's been done for decades. Petitioning process is something separate from the election process. You can petition. If you know you're going to run, you can petition 10 years in advance. There's nothing in the bylaws that prevents you from doing that. The early date that was set to turn in your ballots or turn in your petitions was a year and a half before the election, right? So that's the early date, not the latest date. So they knew that people were getting their petitions way in advance because the earliest date to turn them in was a year and a half before an election. Well, I immediately got a terse email from the UUA election committee claiming that I was in clear violation of the bylaws and clear violation of the election rules, and that I needed to remove that video immediately, and I could never say anything to anybody about any intentions to run until they announced their candidate on November 15th. And then I have until March 1st to turn in the petitions, which is 2.5 months, which requires, as of last year, 50 congregations to vote on your petition in a special official congregational meeting from 3 different regions of the United States. You can't possibly campaign, get petitions in 2.5 months, right? So they really made it impossible, and there is documentation from UUA documentation where it was in a meeting they recommended that they eliminate the petitioning process altogether, and if there was a failure of will to do so, that the petitioning process that the bar be raised so high that it would basically make it impossible to run by a petition. So all of these excuses that they couldn't get more than one candidate, but they're surprised nobody ran by petition, it's pure bullshit. It's evil bullshit to perpetrate that lie on UUA leaders. So anyway, at that point, long story short, I realized that the UUA is lost. There is no appealing to they're better angels when their behavior is so unjust and corrupt. So that's when I started realizing, okay, what can we do? And that is we can support each other. I mean, we created the UUA to support one another, to feel like we're part of something larger, to have an organization that represents our values, which to me are summarized as the inherent worth and dignity of every person, upheld through systems of freedom, reason, and tolerance. And that's when I started, formulating NAUA in my thoughts, North American Unitarian Association, because the UUA has already made claim to the term Unitarian Universalism and threatened to sue people who use it without their permission. Also because the congregations in Canada are going through the very same thing that we're going through. A lot of them have reached out to me, so I realized that this was a continental problem in our congregations. So we're reuniting at least the Canada and the U.S. and anybody else who identifies as part of a liberal religion that wants to join. Yeah, so that's kind of the background. We real quickly, we've been doing well. We officially didn't really launch until March when we had a preliminary website up. We have another website being built now, but that preliminary website, the first day we had 37 members, and I don't even know how they knew that it was up. And we have now, I think, over 500 members. We've had 4 organizations join. Again, this is without us trying to solicit membership. I'm still working on getting the foundation laid. So I'm really positive about the interest we've gained in just a couple of months. One of those organizations is UUMUAC, which gets back to the conversation of where we're at now. which is, UMIAC's role as part of NAUA. And I see it really as the branch of NAUA, the arm of NAUA, if you will, that will lead us in our particularly racial justice work.
Thank you.
Because UMIAC has what I consider the right approach, the only approach it's ever worked, and that is recognizing our common humanity and our need to not only work together, but to form relationships together, so that we recognize that we're all really one body, one people, regardless of what we look like or where we're from. Okay.
And don't forget one baptism.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Well, since 2022, things have heated up. I appreciate recognizing the word I like to use is persecution. And then, I'm still a Marxist-Leninist historical theist with a Christian spin. And ye shall be expelled from the synagogue. That was the prophecy that Chairman Jay made many years ago. And they tried very hard to expel me. I have been 3 or 4 trials. I discovered recently, to my astonishment, I know I had made enemies at the local level. One of the most powerful people here in the city of Chicago at the time, he was head of Unity Temple, which is the big super church in UU structure. Alan Taylor. He communicated with the president of our board, and he said, "Why are you keeping this guy, Finley Campbell and Bobby Campbell, in your church? They're a disgrace. They are troublemakers. They go to these meetings and raise ideas from the floor. Oh my God, how horrible." And so the board chair and at that time, our acting minister prevailed upon me when I was sick to step down from board leadership and to agree not to run for delegates. Later, when I got back to my full consciousness, I said, I can't go with this. This is a declaration of elimination of number 4, free and responsible search for truth and meaning. You got to show that I've been irresponsible in my accusation. They may be strong, may be polemical, but I can define every term. When I say Afrocentric, I'm speaking of those who have made Africa in contradistinction to Europe as the center of all knowledge, all glory, all wisdom. It's centric because that's how they do it. They center on a mystical African past, which is superior to the European Eurasian past. It's neo-racist because it reflects what the new racism is, having members of what used to be called the talented 10th in the African-American community. They like to be called Black in the African-American community, to positions of leadership, borrowing the robes of Black suffering in order to carry out the essence of racism, which is separation, which is making race a reality when it is simply an ideology, making it into a structure, institutional racism, in a word, and then bringing in stuff like white supremacy, white fragility, white fear, and creating a new race that is going to be the target, like the Jews were in one period of time and Blacks in another. And it's a cabal because it's anti-democratic, essentially. And they lie, they make up stuff, they try to shut you down. So I've always tried to make sure my language was rather precise, always a little bit emotional, but precise. Well, that kind of explanation didn't wash with these folks. So they did all kinds of tricks. They put out that I was masquerading as a UU minister. I was masquerading as a UU minister when I would go out to preach. I was getting invitations all over the Chicago area to preach. They liked my ideas, they liked my thoughts, and particularly for Black History Month type activities. Well, this phony accusation, they said, we got letters from my previous ministers, Reverend Nina Gray and Reverend Marlene Walker. And they both told me we wrote no such letters. Now, Reverend Gray was very honest. He said, I didn't want you to preach anywhere in my church because you were too charismatic. Well, that is my danger. being too charismatic. But he said, but there was nothing about you, quote, masquerading as a UU minister. Well, could get that lie untangled. It got spread out. Miss Rochko or Reverend Rochko put it out there. Somebody named Beals or Bees put it out there. Even some of the young stormtroopers here put it out there. Finley Campbell is masquerading as a UU minister. Now, what caused that accusation to have some validity was created by Reed. Is the culprit. We were at a meeting, and he asked the members of the meeting. We used to call it the Central Midwest District meeting, and I had just won a prize for a sermon. We should treat as creed. And he asked the people in the audience, who is the most outstanding Black UU minister that you know? And that was his question, not mine. And some people mentioned Reverend Leon Spencer, some mentioned Sinkford, and some people mentioned my name, Finley Campbell, because they kind of knew me from that. And I kind of laughed it off, never thought about it. But it was his fault that this concept of me being a UU minister got out there. I am ordained Baptist, proud of it. Excuse me, please. And my ordination was/is accepted by the UU Christian Fellowship. So they used that lie to try to discredit me. Another thing they said was this notorious moment at one of the GAs where I wore my stole. I do have a stole for my Christian side of my work. I had on my stole, and I announced that it was about the need to recognize Reverend Morales' contribution as the first Latino minister. And I put on my stole. I was looking distinguished, and I made the mistake of not being clear. I just said, my name is Reverend Finley C. Campbell, and I'm a member, not minister, member of the First Unitarian Church of Chicago. Well, the right-wingers at my church jumped on that. You gave people the impression. I said, I did nothing about being the senior minister. We don't care. You had on your stole. You said you were a member of the church, and you didn't clarify that you were not the senior minister. I said, well, I've been going through these things since 2004. I had never to make any kind of clarification like that. And so they used that, they took me to trial, and they put me on probation for 1 year during that period. Another time, I was passing out a leaflet protesting the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians out front of the church. And then, well, you standing in front of the church. That gives people the impression you're the minister of the church. Here I go again, going to trial.
Finley, at some point, I want to jump in and ask you about, or maybe have a wider discussion about what it means to be in ministry in Unitarian Universalism. Because even if you do get up and say, but yeah, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, so I'll wait until you're done. But
I'm just trying to describe that this is work. This work is not fun, and only the creation of we were first called the caucus, now we're a council, has given me the strength and the courage, plus my belief in historical theism as represented by Comrade Jesus, has kept me going through all this mess. But here's the last part that blew my mind. And Richard will help me with the name of this guy. He was the senior minister at a big church up in Minneapolis. I keep on to call him Robin Eller Isaacs, but that's really not his name. It's something else, Eller or something. He gave to
Finley, it's Eller Isaacs is right. It's Rob.
Rob, okay.
Rob.
Okay, thank you.
Eller-Isaacs.
That's right.
Yep.
The guy who was persecuting me the most vehemently was a Reverend David Schwartz, which I thought he was a neutral. Turns out he was sent by Reverend Isaacs to get rid of the Campbells, and especially me. He was, Reverend Schwartz was given the task of Ahab to get the great white whale, I guess should be a big black whale, that's me, and get rid of me. And boy, did he work, he did the best he could. I mean, the stuff I went to would make a great novel that I may write. So anyway, that's the point. Yeah, there's these personal attacks. But here we are. We are the alternative. We've emerged as the alternative. And I don't want to get myself credit one way or another. I've been conceited, self-centered, and I sometimes get ego tripped a little bit, and sometimes a big bit. But it always was the vision. Multiracial Unitarian Universalists. I met the Unitarians back in 1956 in Atlanta. That allowed people to come to it, the Black churches. We had been put out of a Baptist church, a white Baptist church. We went there to worship with our white Christian brothers and sisters. They don't know you can't come in. You got your own church, but if you want to go hang out with white people, I'm putting words in their mouth. There's this church down the corner, First Unitarian Church of Atlanta. I remember the sermon topic to this day, the Eisenberg uncertainty principle. I said, what kind of a church is this? Where quantum physics is the title of a sermon. And for a year, I would, off and on, I would attend and made friends with people at the church. Did some bad things there as well. I ran off with one of the members' wife to Europe, but that's another story. That was when I met these youths who were welcoming to our group from Morehouse College, 5 of us. And we stayed in contact for a very long time. So when I walked into this UU world in 2004 at the Fort Worth conference and heard about this white racism stuff, that every white is a racist, I had thought I'd run into a Black Power movement, a Black Power takeover, a SNCC meeting. And I had fought those guys in Atlanta back in the late 60s. So we're reaching the fruition point. And so I close, so that's me. And whether they accredit me, I'll probably go through our NAU seminary and get fellowships at some point. But then talk to me, Todd, what is this methodology by which you used to get their ministers?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be brief because I know there's probably some others that want to jump in on something. But from my perspective, Finley, you have been ordained in a religious tradition. You are a Unitarian Universalist, so you are a Unitarian Universalist minister.
Thank you.
The Unitarian Universalist Association keeps making the bonehead mistake that they should know better. They do not make ministers. Churches make ministers. Congregations make ministers. And our tradition has had transfers after transfers after transfers come into our religion over the years who saw the light, if you will, and became some of the most prominent Unitarian and Universalist ministers in our history. For anybody to be angry because you get up and wear a stole and identify yourself as a member of a Unitarian Universalist organization, they don't understand our religion. And that's which is of course a problem.
That's
but
right.
The UUA, they've created a very narrow funnel with this MFC scheme that they invented so that they can actually control the ministers that go into our pulpits, which is a violation of the autonomy of our religion and a violation of our free religious tradition. And NAUA is going to do things a lot differently in that regard. But we have embraced ministers from other traditions. We have worked side by side with ministers from other traditions. We have included them in our gatherings as in our collegial gatherings as ministers, because that is what Unitarian Universalism does. It is what we are about. And when somebody from another tradition, I myself am a transfer candidate from the Southern Baptist tradition, as you know, comes in, we welcome them. And if they recognize that Unitarian Universalism is a better place for them at a certain point in life, wonderful. Now you're a Unitarian Universalist minister, but you are by definition, and I'm not playing semantics here. This is what our tradition is about. You have been ordained by a congregation. You have converted to Unitarian Universalism. You are a Unitarian Universalist minister. You deserve to be respected as such, and you deserve to wear your stole at our meetings. That's not for the UUA or the MFC to decide.
Right on, my brother. feel blessed. All right, my last word is we throw it open. I did actually apply to meet Phil Lombard, but a member of Drum, who was the dean of students, mysteriously lost my application. So instead, I went to Northern Seminary, which is an American Baptist theological seminary, a spinoff from U of C. And that's where I did my studies in preaching. And I did take a course with David Bombal in distinguishing between, when you don't have scripture, what do you use as the basis of your testimony? The use of our personal experiences as our scripture, shall we say. All right, so I thought I was going through all the ropes, but hey, I guess there was other things at play. So to hell with it. Satan moves in his own way. All right, let's throw it open to whoever's around and jump in, ask questions, make comments, as I still tell my students, and any smart remarks you wish to make.
I have a question for Todd. Todd, how many times in your life have you been ordained?
I have actually been I've been ordained once, yeah. Officially, once, yeah. And then I was installed twice in UU churches, yeah.
That's different, yeah. So the installation is just a recognition of your ordination. So
Right.
you were ordained just once, and it was as a Southern Baptist. So there's no difference between you and Finley. If Finley were installed, say, as a well, even if he wasn't, never mind. Your point is good. Your point is a good one.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. And we've had a lot of, one of my famous predecessors, John Dietrich. For those who don't know Dietrich, he was a heretic. He was actually tried as a heretic by the Dutch Reformed Church in 1911 in Pennsylvania. And he was only the second minister from that tradition ever to be tried as a heretic. The first one was his professor, his college professor, but he was the only one convicted. And so he was booted out of the ministry and immediately got accepted as by the Unitarians and ended up coming to Spokane as his first Unitarian church, where he discovered, he began to define himself as a humanist. He discovered the term humanism and started up saying, that's really what I believe. And went on to become the father of religious humanism, one of only two philosophies born in the United States, pragmatism and humanism. And he was the founder of it, one of the original signers of the Humanist Manifesto. He and another minister who was one of his good friends, whose names I'm forgetting, was actually a Southern Baptist, but they had both come to Unitarianism from a different tradition immediately after either being booted out or having an out with their former religion, and went on to be two of the most prominent figures we've ever had in our history. They didn't get reordained; they just were invited to come to Unitarian churches and speak.
Yeah. I like that point. Yeah. Did you hear that, Finley? You don't have to be reordained.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. There's a line in the bylaws, at least there used to be. I think it's still there. It's interesting because it's one sentence. It's a compound sentence, and it says something. I do have to paraphrase it. Something to the effect of, the local congregation has the sole authority to ordain and install ministers. But, and there's literally a but there, but the Ministerial Fellowship Committee has the sole authority to recognize ministers into its fellowship or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And putting it into that sentence there, into one sentence, and conflates the two responsibilities for one thing, but it also makes it sound like the MFC is what is part of the ordination process, right? And there are most ministers going into UU ministry have a process that's been prescribed, and that is you have to declare your candidacy, and the MFC has to accept it. Then you have to get accepted into a seminary and start working on your degree. You have to go through all sorts of hoops, psych evaluation, a career assessment, an internship, clinical pastoral education, all of these things, and you've invested a lot of money. And then when you get to the end of that point, they will set up a meeting with you and talk with you and see if you've met their criteria. And if not, they'll tell you to go back for more, or they'll say, sorry, this isn't going to work out. You've invested all of that time and money trying to become a UU minister. You might not even get it at that point, right? And then after they approve you, you have to go through 3 different renewal processes, somewhere between 3 and 10 years, under the auspices of working with a fully fellowship minister as a mentor. And then you get final fellowship, and they finally leave you the hell alone unless you say something they disagree with, and then they disfellowship you anyway, which is what happened to me. So this is a very long, tedious process, but most ministers going in, they would not dare to try to get a church without the MFC first credentialing them, because they will blackball you. They've been doing this for years if you went outside of their process. I'm one of those few that went outside of their process. I was a UU minister for 6 years before I even entered into their process. And it took me another 10 years before I finally entered into the fellowship process, and another, I think it was a dozen years or more before I ever received final fellowship. But that's just because I was working in ministry, right? It was a hobby. Being fellowship was a hobby to me. I wasn't doing it because I thought that I needed it. I was doing it to be in right relationship with my colleagues, but it turned out to be a disaster. But anyway, that's kind of the thing. We don't realize this in our congregations. We don't. I've had young ministers ask me, "Well, how are you? I don't understand. You haven't been fellowship, but you're a minister. How can you do that? How do you not know our tradition? People died and fought so that we could have this right to call and install and ordain our own ministers without a church authority assigning them to our congregations." Right? That's what we're about. That is one of the definitive qualities of our personality as a liberal religion. Mm-hmm. So it's sad to me that most of us don't understand it. Even those going into UU ministry don't understand it. And the UUA has done nothing but foster this misnomer, which has put the control of the flow of ministers into their hands.
Yeah. I can testify to some of that. I remember I've been attending ordinations for 40 years and off and on. And in the last 20 years or so at the ordination services, there's a statement read that says, whereas the Ministerial Fellowship Committee has done blah, blah, and whereas the Ministerial Fellowship Committee has done blah, blah, and whereas, and so on. There's about 10 of these things. Then this congregation is going to ordain. You know what I mean? It gives it doesn't actually say. I mean, if you want to do a strict logical analysis, it's not a direct lie, but it gives overwhelmingly incorrect information that the power of a congregation to ordain is dependent on the MFC. And it's disgusting. And I've watched this get worse and worse and worse with every ordination.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to disappear for a minute. Continue.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Cometa, I think you're speaking, but you're muted.
We can't hear you, Cometa. You're muted.
Worries. Reverend Eklof, based upon what I hear you saying, when it comes to the MFC, they've kind of taken this, I guess, oversight for the ordination of UUA ministers, and like some of the are within states, they've been like on the books in obscurity, but really had no meat or no teeth to them, but because they allowed them to roll on and roll on, they just became law without being actually ratified. Is that more or less what has happened with the MFC?
I think that's true. Yeah. And you know, traditions should have basic qualifications, right? But in autonomous congregations, those qualifications are up to the individual congregation. So for example, the Southern Baptists, which are an offshoot of the Anabaptists, just as Unitarians were, they have the same free process we do when it comes to ministers. But there's no governing body. There's no MFC-like body in the Southern Baptist Convention. And this is why you see in all across the country, in every small town you drive through, you'll find one or more churches, no matter how small the town. None of them are Unitarian churches, right? They're these traditional congregations. And what helps is so let's say, for example, a little group of people, a town of 1,500 or so, says we need a Baptist church here. All right, well, who's going to be the minister? Well, how about Farmer John? Man, he really knows his Bible. Right. Or how about the 17-year-old kid down the street? Man, he's filled with the Spirit, you know. Yeah. And they were doing it, right? But that's exactly what they're getting a minister who's volunteering, who loves it, who inspires them, does the work. In the meantime, you drive into the big city and there's First Baptist Church there. And they say, well, we want to have a minister that has at least 15 years experience and has a seminary degree, maybe has a PhD. Well, they get to do that, right? They decide what credentials they want. They decide what level of experience they want, what they can afford. That is the tradition. And if there was nothing wrong with having an organization that said, you know, we want to at least say to congregations, the ministers that are put forward have gone through seminary. There's been a background check. There's been those sort of things, whatever it might be. But what they have failed to do was separate the MFC in a way that was clear to themselves, clear to new ministers, and most importantly, clear to our congregations. And they've also crippled congregations. Right, they've crippled them from having some individuals who might be among the greatest ministers in our history, just as they have been in the past, because they're not eligible. They've also created a space where you have very limited amount of time each year to find a minister. It's a race. It's very cruel. There might be more than one congregation that wants one minister, and that minister has to choose between those, and the others get left out. They've invested thousands of dollars into this process of, you know, means flying and traveling and bringing people in and out and having their committee fly places. Thousands of dollars they could have put towards something much more important. And all of that without really letting congregations know that, no, you have a lot more freedom of choice here and a lot more possibility than you would think. And so, yeah, I think the real process has been that this has turned into almost canon process where anyone going through the MFC wanting to become a UU minister today will find out very quickly if you do try to buck the system, you will get nowhere. You will have spun your wheels and wasted all of your effort. And congregations are left with a small, increasingly shrinking group of people that are towing the party line, if you will, the UUA line in our congregation. So they're filling our pulpits with this madness that is splitting many of our congregations apart, because folks are coming in, they've been taught that there's something terribly evil about Unitarian Universalism. It's founded upon a trinity of errors. It suffers from a white supremacist mindset, and you are the savior. You have to go in and immediately start fixing things. And immediately they go in and people go, oh my God, what is this religion I've been part of? What is going on here? Why are we being called these things? And they're literally driving things apart. I don't know if you saw the report just a couple of weeks ago, but up until 2 years ago, the average number of new ministers was between 25 and 30. The past 2 years, respectively, it's been 5 and 8.
Actually, I read your newsletter, so these are things that prompted me to want to, like, you know, be able to, you know, get in and hear what was being said today. because I did read this article in your newsletter,
Yeah.
and it sparked my interest. And it was like, how can the MFC take on and decide who gets to make it through the process without anybody else raising their saying like, hey, look, you're governing in this area and no further. And it's been allowed to matriculate through, I guess, many seasons. It sounds like that now it's as though the governing body that should be speaking up and saying this has been absolved into the MFC. So now they become, if you will, the servant to the master.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Very well put. Yeah. I think that's exactly what's happened.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's everybody's fault. The congregations have been content to only want candidates who are in fellowship with the UUA. They've been willing to put all the vetting of candidates off, not to involve themselves with it themselves, but to let the UUA take care of it. And of course, for a long time, that was working fine. But then slowly and slowly and slowly, it stopped working, and the congregations haven't noticed it, or they're just beginning to notice it. And yeah.
You know, what happens if a congregation gets, we'll say, a minister that they're not pleased with? What is the process then to be able to get rid of the minister that's not being effective and efficient for their congregation, being that they've gone through this process of search committees, vetting, the MFC? What happens then? Are they invited to leave and then they get full retirement benefits? I don't know what the process is on the back end.
I'll be real quick on that one. That's a great question. But traditionally, the UUA would come to the rescue of that minister and negotiate a departure.
Okay.
Usually, a bad ministry takes about 5 years to end. So you have your first year is your honeymoon stage, your second year is your denial stage, and the next 2 years are working towards
Getting out.
And then it takes about a year to get them out. So it's about 5 years. If it's a bad ministry, it takes about 5 years to end, unless they do something so egregious that they just are fired on the spot.
Maureen has her hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering if a church went outside of the MFC and got a minister the way they're allowed to, but aren't doing, what would the UUA do to them?
Nothing.
You sure?
Well, traditionally nothing.
Yeah,
right?
but I mean now.
But now there's a new thing going on where the UUA is beginning to interfere with congregational life. They interfered behind the scenes in my congregation. We found the email, so we know that happened. At the highest level, Carrie McDonald, the executive vice president, was meeting with board members who wanted me gone, trying to figure out, talking about how to get rid of me. Recently, Terry Cummings, who spoke at our NAUA service on Saturday, was disfellowshipped from her church, and not disfellowshipped from the UUA or by the MFC, who interfered at the church she was an interim at and very well liked. So basically some staff members didn't like how she was managing things. They went and complained to the UUA, and the UUA started investigating rather than turning it back to the congregation, which had already investigated and said no. Then they suspended her while they investigated. It was a good investigation. They came, so there's nothing, she didn't do anything here except expose some people that were getting money and it wasn't being reported, employees. So there is a tendency to start to interfere with congregational life. So I can't tell you what's going to happen to a congregation that brought in somebody the UUA wouldn't want. But Richard,
I'm a member of a congregation that doesn't have a minister. We have a guest preacher every week, but I'm the guest preacher 10 times a year, and I am a minister. So people tend to think of me as like in some way a minister of the church, though I'm not. And a man who a minister himself who, I don't know if he's a member of the MFC now or he was just the last few years, but someone definitely associated with the UUA hierarchy. This is a man who served on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee for several years. He wrote a letter to the worship committee at the church, a letter not shared with me. This is a letter sent behind my back to the members of the worship committee, warning them that I'm a dangerous person because I have ideas that hurt gay people and trans people and black people, and warning them about me. And I couldn't believe it. And of course, their reaction was to say, well, their reaction was just to dismiss it. But I was appalled that this had happened. And that's an example. I don't know if he still has an official role at the UUA, so I can't call it an official UUA interference, but it's very close to that. This man, at least if he's not on the MFC now, he was for the last several years.
And this is the thing that, you know, not too long ago, that was the violation of the code of ethics, right? For a minister to go to a congregation and complain about another minister, particularly without saying, that would have had you disfellowshipped. Those were the violations. Now that's the norm. It is the norm to publicly attack those with whom you disagree, and get rid of those that you get rid of. And that is a very sad tradition. I'll just tell you one more story. When I was in Louisville many years ago at the church there, I went on a vacation. I don't know where I went, but one of the members of that congregation who was a troubled individual. She had bipolar illnesses, and so anyway, for some reason she called the district. That's back when we still had districts, and said, this minister is tearing this church apart. You guys have to come down and take care of things, get rid of him, and all this kind of stuff. Unbeknownst to me or anybody else, when I come back, I get a call from the district executive, whom I knew. To Todd, are you okay? Yeah, why? Well, we got this strange call from so-and-so. I said, yeah, you know, she has some issues. I don't know what that was about, but everything's fine. And what they told her was, we don't have any control over your congregation or your minister. That's not our business. You have to go back to your board, and your congregation has to deal with that. That's how it was handled. They knew better. They knew better than to interfere with congregational life. That is this is a dramatic change that we're seeing today. For someone to get away with for a minister to get away, a member of the MFC to get away with what happened to Richard was unthinkable not too long ago.
And this was within the last year, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
This is a recent thing. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Thank you for helping me put this in a better perspective after reading your article. I better understand the outrage that is taking place, and the reason that this is a platform for being able to do outreach so that members, congregations can see what's going on behind the scenes to be able to better make reformations and go through a reconstructive period to be able to set things right within the UUA. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you.
Maureen has her hand up.
Yeah, one other question. You know, I've read a lot of stuff the UUA people say online about you guys, and isn't it possible to sue some of them for libel?
Well, yes, yes, it is possible. The problem is that in the U.S., we value freedom of speech so much that it is very difficult to actually sue somebody for defamation laws. There has to be some serious proof of damages, usually financial damages. So just finding attorneys that will take it on is really, really, really hard. I mean, if I pushed and searched yes, I'm sure that I personally would have a tremendous case against the UUA, but I'd rather go about it in another way. I was involved in a lawsuit years ago when I was fired from a job for standing up for gay marriage, which is interesting for a homophobic person to do, but nevertheless, I lost this job, and it took me 6 years and lots of money, and it made Uncle Sam happy with the taxes, and my attorneys happy with the profits, and it gave me a moral victory. But it was a lot of effort and a lot of pain, and you gotta, you want to talk about having people drag you through the mud, enter into a lawsuit. So I would rather just do something more productive, more positive, and that's what NAUA is about.
Hi, Reverend Morrow. How are you? Good to see you. You're on mute. How's everything going?
I'm mute. I'm pretty well. I've just been enjoying taking in this discussion. I had a couple of comments I'd like to make since you kind of invited me in. One, I served a congregation that had been very troubled. It was known as the most troubled congregation in our district, and one friend called it the place where ministers go to die. And they had been, it was a congregation at one point ordained its custodian to become the minister, because the person had very insightful things to say. It didn't turn out that well, but they learned their lesson. Later, that congregation had a big split. There's a terrible fracture in the congregation. And one of the two sides of the groups tried to form another congregation in the same town. And at that point, the UUA came in to say, no, you can't do that. We're going to protect the congregation. So there was sort of that sense of protecting the existing congregation, as there had been that sense of protecting colleagues for the UUMA, MFC. So it was complete opposite to the experience up in Spokane, where the UUA is trying to create another congregation, pull another congregation out of the existing congregation. So it's just been amazing to watch these changes. And one of the other things I wanted to comment on, I think many people, I was listening to people talking about final fellowship. I just wanted to point out that final fellowship no longer exists. That's a category that was eliminated at a General Assembly in, I think it was 2018. And I learned that this was underway really, really late, an effort to replace final fellowship with full fellowship, which would give the MFC and the UUMA more control over the continuing education of ministers. I had prepared a statement for that, a statement to read to that before the vote. The people were presented with this without ever hearing any dissenting voices at the General Assembly. So I was going to say this: if you believe that moves to end tenure for teachers and university professors are a threat to academic freedom, I urge you to examine the proposal to terminate our UU ministry's final fellowship status and replace it with the more tentative and provisional full fellowship. Final fellowship can be compared to tenure and freedom of the pulpit with academic freedom. So I had this statement prepared. It actually came up to the floor, and I saw someone walk over to the moderator. And the moderator was beginning to read the statement. They said, no, we won't be reading that statement. So, I'd probably waited an hour or so for this to have the chance to come up for this to come up in the process. So that one challenge, this was being presented as a friendly resolution to the General Assembly. Even one challenge would have meant that it had to be debated and discussed. So by stopping my comment, the opportunity to challenge this was ended, and fellowship became tentative. In a sense, they ended tenure in a vote that had no discussion. So this is how far back, and whether there's any kind of master plan to curtail our freedoms, to limit us, to take control, it almost doesn't matter. They have an instinct for what you need to do to limit the freedom of the pulpit and the freedom of the ministers in the pulpit, the freedom who can become and be and call themselves a minister. So it's just been an amazing thing to watch this cluster of events take place. I was ordained in 1985. I did my internship in 1979. So I've been at this for a while, and I've been shocked and appalled. I'm used to it now. Anyway, thank you for inviting me to speak, Kenneth. I've been getting ready, to say a couple of things.
Thank you for being prepared. I mean, I didn't know where the conversation was going to go, but I did see that you joined, and so didn't want you to feel like your voice could not be heard today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ready to, go right ahead. So we thank you for sharing.
I often keep my my Zoom camera off because I have an injury from a fall from a roof some years ago. So I often have to get up and really move around and exercise my back, which is very distracting. So I'll probably be turning the camera off again.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your comments today. Greatly appreciate it. And I didn't know that, that had taken place. Again, I am an assistant to Dr. Campbell and a membership engagement committee to do things behind the scenes. So all the things at the forefront. If I don't read all the notes that come in, I am playing catch up. And so this gives me an opportunity to see all of you engaged and get your different perspectives on what's going on within the world of UUA. Jack, is that you, or are you just waving hi to me? Hi. Okay.
I wanted to ask Todd a question, if that's okay.
Of course.
Todd, I wonder if you could tell us what immediate plans do you have for, say, the next 6 months with NARA?
Yeah, so my hope is that by the end of our first year, which may be just about 6 months from now, that the foundation for NAUA is going to be pretty well established, so that I can start really concentrating on membership. I want to spend most of my time visiting congregations and recruiting new members for NAUA. That would be the kind of biggest thing. We've got some pretty successful, I think, programs in place already. Those are the things that keep us connected as a community, right? An online magazine, Tuesday night classes, a worship service. The big piece of it, as I discussed in the letter that went out this past week, is the ministerial part. I would like to see within 6 months for NAUA to have placed a minister in a congregation, at least one, and to begin to get other ministers who are still working as members of NAUA, and to recognize it as a viable alternative, but also to recruit ministers from other traditions and help congregations process it in a way that is wise, but really leaving it up to the congregations, right? So that we start to see UU congregations being able to say, okay, well, no, we can't really afford to go on a $10,000 search and hire a minister for $150,000 a year, whatever it is, with benefits and all that. But you know what? We do have somebody in our community who loves to speak here, and maybe they would consider being our minister. And let's see about getting them. And at which point the NAUA would say, well, yeah, you want to do a background check. Here's some places you can do that. You want to check the credentials, make sure look at references, those sort of things, just common best practices, so that we're starting to recreate the culture around ministerial placement. And that was really the biggest issue for me. It's one of the reasons I wanted to start NAUA, is because I know this crisis is upon us and we have to come up with an alternative. Unfortunately, it's not it's not going to be something that we can do swiftly. But I do hope within 6 months we will have made headway on providing ministerial service to our members.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that a lot of the chaos in the UUA now has to do with our faulty governance structure. At the moment, the structure is such that the people on the board are nominated by the nominating committee. Well, who nominates the people on the nominating committee? Well, the nominating committee. So what you have in effect is a small group of people who choose who they think should be the board members, and then they nominate their friends to continue their work on the nominating committee. There's an ingrown group that is placing the people with the power. Our democracy is badly broken. It was found to be badly broken 15 years ago by a UUA board task force called the Fifth Principal Task Force. And when they reported back in, I think, 2009, they said, General Assembly is not really democratic. It's not really democratic. And since then, many, many steps have been taken to make General Assembly less democratic. You know, this is the root. A lot of these people that are doing these awful things, it's not so much that they're evil, but there's a system that allows them to become evil, to allows them to avoid checks and balances and things. Jack, go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Jack.
I'm sorry. What do you think is the possibility with of promoting? Well, I know the answer even as I asked the question of promoting a bylaw change that nominating committee members may not nominate themselves for anything. I mean, this is I wanted to ask a question first. Do you know what financial aspects are involved with nominating committee membership? For example, do they have meetings at headquarters for which the UUA pays their transportation expenses and a per diem? In other words, is this a corrupt deal? Are they profiting personally from being members of the nominating committee? Perhaps you know something about it, Todd.
I don't, but maybe Dick Burkhardt would know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I would assume, having served, on different committees back in the district days, that, they covered your expenses for traveling to meetings and that sort of thing. But the gain is, it's not necessarily a financial gain, it's an ideological gain, right? That's where the corruption comes in, is you have a small group of people that said, hey, look there's a shell here. Let's move in and live in it, but we're going to have to just kind of squeeze out everybody who's already living in it, right? And so you've got a $250 million endowment fund, which they now want to raid because their mismanagement means they don't have the monies they were getting, and they have created a self-perpetuating system where they can stay in control and eliminate anybody from running that they haven't approved, and that's where the real benefit is coming in with this group is. They have hoarded power, which really what money is, right? Money is a way to have power of choice, and so they found another way around that.
Yeah, listen.
And also, if you listen to the recorded presentations of the candidates for this year's election to nominating committee, all of whom I think, or all but one, are current members. It's obvious that these are not the best and the brightest people in the UUN. Their presentations were amateurish and gee, I can't even think of the words I want. Pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I've just completely lost faith in the people that imagine that they're our leaders.
Listen, we have to end this now because we want to be very careful to not have these conversations conflict with General Assembly events. So we're going to terminate this now. Tonight at 8 o'clock, we're going to have our monthly third Wednesday worship. And after that, there'll be more open discussion, which will be open-ended.
Tell us who the preacher is tonight.
Finley is.
Finley Campbell.
Finley, yeah. So I have to end this meeting now.
Okay, well, thank you all. I
Bye,
appreciate
everybody. Have a great
and
day.
hearing your perspectives.
Thanks for
Have a
coming.
great day. Bye now.
Bye-bye.